What a wonderful entrance. What a wonderful thing to be talking about. And as we get stuck into this conversation, I want all of you in the audience to be a little bit rude. I want you busily on your phones. I want you getting onto Instagram, onto Twitter. I want you hashtagging STYT sooner than you think. I want you to really blasting out some of the conversation that we have here. And I also want you ruminating on questions of your own. This is a fabulous panel. Top VC, key portfolio companies in the realms of making your world a better place. Please ask them questions. But first of all, we're going to do a little poll. We're going to gain how the audience purchases at the moment. I want to bring up our first poll because I want to ask the audience, how much does environmental considerations affect your food purchases? At the moment, when you go into the supermarket, do you think about the environment when you make a food purchase? Do you worry where your mango has been flown into? Do you worry about perhaps the methane that has been brought to us by the meat that you're consuming? So every time, occasionally, rarely. I'm impressed. 38% of you, about a third of the room, is already making purchases on the back of environmental considerations. So first of all, let's go to the money behind these two exquisite portfolio companies. Niklas, talk to us about how you spotted this consumer movement that already every time and occasionally people are already thinking about the food they're eating, their food they're purchasing, and how this affects the environment.
Sure. Food production and the food chain is a huge problem for the environment and for human health and for animal welfare. And so it's one of the really, really big core problems when you think about climate and when you think about our health. So it's something that really needs to be addressed. And there's been this, I think we're like at the end of a big trend where the food industry has been trying to produce cheaper food with more processed food, that they're trying to kind of with more addiction because of sugar and things that just are unhealthy. And because there's been a drive to push prices down, which is unsustainable in many ways. So now we see a range of companies, and we have some of the best ones here, which are addressing this with genuine innovation and producing food that is both environmentally sustainable, healthy, and really tasty. And one of the things here is, of course, what we see here, the consumer demand. So there is a lot of consumers, and specifically younger consumers, are, when you ask them questions, do you rather pay more for something that's sustainable? 2/3 or more would say yes. The reality still today is that when they go out and buy something, whether it's food or anything else, price is still a determining factor for most people. So what we need to do is we need to find innovation that can also produce food that is also kind of on parity on price. It might not be the cheapest, but at least it cannot be a big premium. And that's when you can get all the wins.
Let's hear the journeys of the companies. We're going to start with Infarm, which, if you hadn't already read on Bloomberg, wherever you consume your news, has just raised $100 million, coming from, in part, Atomico. Wonderful news. Congratulations on the big funding round. It's a big funding round for a Berlin-based company. You're a European champion. What does Infarm do? We can already see some pictures of how you process, but you are bringing basically fruit, vegetables, you're not growing it on a farm and transporting it. You're bringing it to the shop floor. You're bringing it to the restaurant.
Exactly. So we at Infarm, instead of growing food outside the cities and distributing produce, from very early on decided to develop a technology that will enable us to integrate our farms throughout the city, to cater many different kinds of clients, from chef in a restaurant to grocery shops to supermarket chains and even huge distributors in their distribution centers. So distributing the farms themselves rather than the produce as close as possible to the consumer, to where the food will be consumed and eaten.
What inspired that? What made you think one day this is a problem that needs to be solved?
We were asking ourselves this question since the time that we discovered that people are talking about urban farming and talking about the mass urbanization that is happening in our world. And we asked ourselves why urban farming, rooftop farming is not becoming a huge solution and a practice that happens everywhere. And very early on, we thought that we need to find a solution that will be easy and fast in deployment and will not require a huge amount of funding to bring a farm like this. And that's how we chose a very modular approach that will enable us to build farms quickly and basically stack them to meet any kind of space or market demand.
Fascinating. Already within at least 25 retailers. Memphis Meats. Talk to us about turning a little bit of meat, a cell, and growing it into basically the dish that we see in front of us now.
Certainly, yes. So Memphis Meats is a food company that's growing meat, poultry, and seafood directly from animal cells without having to grow the full animal. So the idea really is humanity has evolved eating meat for the last 10,000 years, and growing and farming animals and domesticating animals has fundamentally reshaped humanity and let us feed about 7 billion people. But the idea here is now we're going to double that demand for meat in the next 30 years. That's 70 billion animals going to 140 billion animals, and the hunger for meat is globally increasing. And that's where we started thinking about how could we start growing this very efficiently, but also in a very sustainable way. And the idea is we take high-quality animal cells from the meat that we're already eating. They have some cells that can renew themselves. So we identify those cells, and we give them the essential nutrients for them to grow into beef, pork, chicken, duck. And subsequently, when we harvest it in about 3 to 4 weeks after starting the process of cultivating the meat, it's very familiar. It's what people have been used to cooking and eating, and it just has a magical response when people see the meat being cooked in front of them. So I think on the back you're seeing that's Southern fried chicken, which we just debuted recently. And our goal was to show that you could grow meat from animal cells from multiple species using a very simple process. And you're seeing chicken there that's cut into slices, and you can see the texture with the fibers in there. We're not on the market yet, but this is a very deep technical solution using the natural power of a cell. And if you think about an animal, it's made of 30 trillion cells, but it all starts from one cell. And instead of growing meat in an animal, we're growing it outside the animal in a cultivator in a very clean environment. And we think that's the way that the world's going to be ready to feed the next 10 billion people that we're looking for, and doing it without competing for the resources with another 70 billion animals, along with the 3 billion people joining us. And the numbers are staggering. A third of all the water that's used is to feed animals to feed humans. 20% of the greenhouse gas emissions come from raising animals. And it's really the fundamental problem there for not being able to scale beyond where we are is the incredible inefficiency in calorie conversion. For instance, it takes 34 calories to make 1 calorie of beef. There's no industry in the world that's survived this long and thrived with such extreme down conversion of energy. And I think right now with all the companies in this space and also in Silicon Valley as well as globally, food safety, food security are the number one concern for humanity. And that's now in the environmental and climate change bubble. So I think the time is now, and we're glad to be here.
But Uma, you started your career, your previous role was at a cardiovascular surgeon or international cardiovascular expert. How on earth did you go from cutting up hearts, for want of a better expression, to deciding to want to do this, to help create beef?
I'd say I'm probably one of the entrepreneurs that had the more circuitous path to come to grow meat. So I'm an interventional cardiologist, which means I was in the business of opening blood vessels when someone had a cardiac arrest or a heart attack. I trained at the Mayo Clinic, and that's really where the idea came from, where they're like, okay, there's nothing more rewarding or satisfying than resuscitating someone who's in cardiac arrest and then bringing them back and them embracing their families. So I think as I started thinking about the food system, to me it seemed like It's just an important opportunity to resuscitate the food system. So if I continued my practice as a cardiologist, maybe I'd save another 2,000 or 3,000 lives. But if we actually succeed in growing meat from cells, it's literally impacting billions of human lives and trillions of animal lives. And that was just an opportunity that was very hard to pass up. And the final motivation has to come from someone really close to you. So I'd been speaking about this with my kids and my wife for the last 10 years, and they finally said they got tired of me talking about it. Said, why don't you just do this yourself? So.
And your son is in the audience. He's flown over with you.
Yes, he is.
Niklas, you see the passion from these sorts of founders. You can experience, you're able to taste the product, to know it. What made you sure that these sorts of big societal issues that we're talking about, yes, we all know the problem of food safety, food security, the lack thereof, the supply-demand imbalance. But why these companies can be the most successful? How are they going to make you money?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And I think in the past we've been thinking about, these are things where we need to do, kind of companies that need to exist and because of these reasons, and maybe they can get some grants from the governments and subsidies. But that's not really scalable. The companies that are going to be really scalable are the ones that can actually use innovation, use technology, and produce these products and services in a commercially sustainable way. So that means that they need to be able to ultimately be able to produce these products at a good margin. And if they can do that, then they will be sustainable. And we've already talked about the consumer demand, which is there, and it's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And the public awareness around these issues is increasing. And it will be, I'm pretty certain that if you fast forward 5-10 years, it's going to be much bigger consumer awareness about these issues. So there's going to be a bigger pull from consumers. So the consumer demand will be there. The other thing is what we have seen in general around tech companies is the ones who can attract the best people are usually the ones who have an upper hand. And today, millennials want to work in companies with a real purpose and be able to impact society. So these companies that have a real mission, a real purpose, are able to attract much better people. They're better to build a strong culture and values and get people to really pull in and make things happen. So those are also other reasons why these are kind of very positive trends. I think the other thing is capital. So maybe it's like someone like us as a venture firm. Our job is maybe to be a little bit ahead of the curve. But what we see also from our investors, our pension funds, they're asking us, what are you doing around the sustainability development goals? What can you show us what kind of investment you're doing that are improving the state of our planet and addressing all of these issues? So we also get our investors who want to do this because the pensioners want to make sure that their money is being put to a good cause. So it's kind of a full circle.
It's interesting. I'm very pleased to see some of you already putting in your questions. And someone has asked, as Richard Harries has in fact asked, as socially positive businesses, what way, if any, does the financial system treat you differently? Uma, have you found that financial system has treated you differently? Or have you found that you've just managed to align yourself in terms of strategic investors?
Absolutely. I can tell a story very clearly looking at anyone's eyes and say, look, we have a company that's got a profit aligned with purpose, and there's an enormous need for the work that we're doing. And when we looked at our investor list, we wanted to say we should look like the world's demographic. So we've clearly said we want impact investors that care deeply about environment, animal welfare, and health. We've also said we want economic investors that see the enormous economic opportunity because meat is a $2 trillion annual opportunity. Just on the documented, financial numbers, there's an undocumented amount of a market that's probably twice that big. But the idea here is that's a market that has never been touched. And when we talk about replacing meat with meat, not a meat alternative, the economic and financial investors get enormously excited because that never existed in the world. And for the first time, we're saying we can bring that. And here's the pieces that will bring it together. And the last part of it is the existing meat industry also should get excited because, one of the last things we want to happen here is really not to disrupt when we don't need to disrupt, but actually bring people along. And we said we'll build a big tent. And our investor list looks as following. For impact investors, we've got Bill Gates and Branson who care deeply about impact. And for financial investors, we have Atomico and DFJ Threshold from the Valley. And for meat industry incumbents, we've got the number 1 and number 2 meat companies in the U.S., Tyson and Cargill. And that's done purposely to let people say, you could all get behind this because this is a mission that is really aligning profit with purpose. And we've been very successful with that, not only for investors, but also attracting talent.
I want to stick with the theme of money here a little bit, as base as it is, but talk about the profitability, particularly with Infarm, because interestingly, another question from the audience comes saying Google notably got out of vertical farm market because they say they couldn't get the right unit economics. How did Infarm solve this problem? You're solving this problem exactly because it's decentralized? Is that what makes you different from other competitors as well? Because there's other players out there in America, plenty, Bowery Farms, who are raising money, but not getting to the scale that you're already at.
Exactly. The modular approach is what enables us to be very quickly in deployment, and also having customers basically picking up the vegetables within 2 to 3 weeks from installment of a farm. So I think that's the main thing that makes us different. And if you look on the broader market, we of course differentiate in the efficiency. So our farms are probably more than 400 times more efficient than soil-based agriculture.
How?
Because we grow vertically, because we use the space in the most efficient way, because our farms are actually work on a circle base, meaning that after 3 weeks we have the first harvest, and then on a daily basis we can harvest the mature plants. That makes it actually possible and suitable to be inside of a supermarket.
And this is leaves we're thinking about. What products can you actually provide at the moment?
So at the moment we grow all sorts of leafy greens and herbs. We have more than 65 different varieties on our catalog, which is that's another big issue of modularity, because even in our big farms we don't need to optimize on one specific variety, but we can grow thousands of varieties. So that's another thing that definitely differentiates us. In our labs in Berlin, we already grow mushrooms and flowering fruits like tomatoes or strawberries, which will come next.
So more to come.
Yeah.
Uma, let's talk about your so-called competition, because I doubt there's much direct competition of growing meat from cells. But if I have to mention Beyond Meat one more time on air, the IPO has sent it into the stratosphere when it comes to the investor-based perception of Beyond Meat, which of course is a plant-based alternative to meat. But we know that there are plenty of vegetarian options out there. Why actually making meat? Is it different? And how do you set yourself apart from some of these other companies that are proving very successful?
Yeah, it's incredibly energizing to see companies like Beyond Meat and other companies trying to get meat alternatives to the table. One of the things that's happening along with that is the increase in consumer awareness. And we've always had this instinct that consumers care deeply about where their food comes from. And right now, we're developing a process that they can get truly excited about and not merely tolerate. Because when you think about animal agriculture, it's really, if we all had the option of getting meat to the table through a different process, I'd say the majority would put their hand up and say yes. But we're tolerating a system because there's no alternative. So when we think about us, like you said, this is not a competition. We feel like we just have such an incredibly efficient solution that people can get behind. We really are thinking about this as the holy grail of being able to put meat on the table through a different process. So while Beyond Meat and other companies are definitely increasing consumer awareness, specifically related to environmental impact and also the resource inefficiency of the current system, it's a great message to be able to get out there because that's very aligned with the values that we're talking about. But what we're also saying is you don't have to give up what you love. We want to leave the choice on the table and continue eating meat. And that's, I think, very powerful, and that's a differentiator for us.
How many hearts and minds have you had to win in terms of, yes, you want to eat something grown in a lab?
Yeah, so that's the most interesting part. Because when you start talking about this, of course, 3 years ago, this industry did not exist. But people had been talking about it for decades. In fact, I think Winston Churchill, we're sitting here, he said in 1932 that why grow an entire chicken when you can just grow parts of it? I mean, there's clearly visionary people have been talking about it. But 3 years ago, this was science fiction. But once we started showing what it looks like People come through. We've done hundreds of tastings. And the magic really happens when they taste. And I don't think a well-calibrated meat eater can be fooled easily because that palate has evolved over thousands of years. But when they start eating meat directly from cells, you can't tell the difference because it's identical at the cellular level, at the level of the genome and the genetics and the proteins that you're eating and the fatty acids. There's no need to mask anything. It is meat. So that's where you win over the customers or consumers.
So Winston Churchill's been talking about it. Nicholas, therefore, do we think that this is going to be actually for every generation? Or do you, at the moment, you mentioned millennials want a sense of purpose when they work. Is it millennials at the moment and Gen Z, or Gen Z, as I should say as a Brit, getting too Americanized already, how they spend? Or is it every generation that you think will be converted to Infarm and Memphis Meat products?
I think it would be for everyone, because if you taste Infarm produce, it's just so much tastier than what you buy in the supermarket because it's so fresh and it's so pure. It's remarkable. So if you like food that tastes good, you choose this as long as there's price parity. And I think there's always, unfortunately, that what's happened is that we are spending less and less of our disposable income on food, and this is unfortunate. Where still is this situation where people who are well off buy organic, and most people are buying the cheapest they can get. So I think it's important that we can, over time, and which is happening, that the cost curves is going to get down, so these alternatives can be available to as many people as possible. But I don't think this is a generational thing, because when I was a kid, my mother was cooking, and we had homemade food. That's great, and it's like today we're ordering from takeaway food, and if the more we can cook ourselves, and with the fresh food, the better. So I don't think necessarily it's a generational thing.
We have some really interesting data on this, and globally there's been people looking at meat from animal cells and asking the questions, would you eat this? And 2/3 of the people globally are really excited about this. In the US, we have a lot more detailed data, and a very interesting splits happening. Age 55 or less, and then millennials and Gen Zs is between 60 to 70 or north of 70%. But even in those age 55 plus or so, it's more than 50%. So like Niklas said, there's a very high level of awareness and readiness for this product. And we do get many comments like this. Maybe I'm thinking it's from the millennials, where they say, look, the current food system and production of meat is not natural. What you guys are talking about is cells growing with essential nutrients and multiplying on their own without doing anything, because that's what cells naturally do. This is natural, and you need to come and talk about this with us. So one of our roles is to really communicate well that this is how we are growing it, this is why we are doing it, and this is what we intend to put on the table. And once we start going out with that message, I think it's incredibly powerful. And that's one reason why when we started this company 3 years ago, we decided not to be in the stealth mode, unlike all startups who love to be in stealth mode, because people have to get used to talking about this. They need to understand what it is and see what the products are, and then have a frame of reference to where food's coming from now.
How soon will that be on the table?
We would be ready to go to market once the regulatory system is ready. We've been steadily showing products. We've shown beef, we've shown chicken, we've shown duck, and started to lower cost. We're now gearing up for scale, and we'll be thinking about in the next 2 years, we want to be able to build a plant to start scaling up production. And our goal is to get to market as soon as possible. We'll have an announcement on that in the future, but not yet.
Okay, interesting. Osnat, there's one for you. I take my frame of reference from the fact that Beyond Burgers sell out instantly in any supermarket I go to in Brooklyn. It says a lot about Brooklyn. Yeah. But they charge $12, so about £8, £9 for just 2 burgers. There is a premium for the alternative. A question asked from the audience here is, what is the premium for an in-farm product versus the farm product the customer pays for at the supermarket? Is there one? Is it pretty much the same?
So, I'm very proud to say that it's pretty much the same. Our aim is to provide freshest, purest food for everybody. And we sell it usually in the more medium range supermarkets. And we are competitive in the prices.
Okay, so there comes your overall justification in terms of price point. I'm interested in what perhaps you see as the challenges from getting the right talent pool at the right time? Because we heard from Niklas saying that actually this is where people want to be hired now. They want a sense of purpose. But in Berlin, have there been the right talent there at the right time? Have you had to educate people? Would you say hiring is up there in terms of your key challenges?
Not really. I actually agree with Niklas. Berlin is a very international city that draws a lot of talent from all over the world. And our team is very international, coming from all over the world, but also from different expertise and skill sets.
Interesting. What about at Memphis Meats? You must have a whole host of backgrounds if you've got one in cardiology.
It's an incredible team to be a part of. I think one of the easiest things for us to kind of scale up is talent, and our talent pool has been incredibly diverse. We have people from 12 countries, 58% are women, and we've got people that are in developmental biology, bioengineering, biomaterials, food science, and operations and regulations. So, and creative. It's just getting all of them under one roof because it's a very relatable product. You're eating meat 2 or 3 times a day, and you're working on growing meat directly for the future, and that's an incredibly exciting vision. And everybody walks into the room or even applying with a very self-motivated vision and mission. So I think even if anybody in the world would pay them 2, 3, 4 times more, they're not going anywhere because they're like, I want to make a difference.
Yeah.
Sure. That's nice. Niklas, you've done a lot of thought leadership here in London and Europe about diversity and inclusion. Is this something you're seeing being evident as well at these sorts of companies?
Yes. So diversity is a huge problem in our industry, both within the startup ecosystem and also within investors. And what is really, really exciting about what Memphis Meat did very early on, you got the balance, the gender balance right very, very early on, and we talked about this just before coming out, is that, and then once you get it right in the beginning, then you can scale. So the things that we're trying to encourage companies that we're investing in now is to focus on diversity as soon as possible. Typically, what happens is that a startup gets investments, and it's like they're trying to hire whoever they can hire, and they don't have an HR manager. So all these things, it's like, well, we can deal with those things later. If you deal with it later, it's probably too late. So it's really when you are a young company, you can actually pay attention to get the balance right.
Uma, I think this is an interesting question from the audience, saying, as a former cardiologist, how do you justify encouraging people to eat meat given the heart health implications? And you've got some interesting insights as to how you're potentially going to rebalance the health content, or lack thereof, in a steak, for example.
With greens.
It's an absolutely important question. I get asked a lot. In cardiology practice, I dealt with people that had literally died multiple times, and I opened up all the vessels and stented all their 3 coronary arteries, and it's called the full metal jacket because every artery is filled with stents. And you tell the patient, stop smoking, take your Plavix, and come back and watch your diet. And I'm not ascribing cardiovascular disease to a particular diet, but poor diet is one of the main reasons for it. Invariably, 20 to 40% would come back in a few months, and they'll restart smoking, and they'll go back to poor diet. What's the message from that? Even when your life is at stake, humanity is going to do what they love to do, which is eating really well, and people love eating meat. I'm like, this is going to be an important problem to go after, because I was injecting stem cells into patients to regrow heart muscle, and that's kind of where the idea came from. Can you grow food from cells? But when I started looking deeper into it, yes, you can, because you can start doing meats that are much more leaner, having much more beneficial fatty acid contents. You can start thinking about how cholesterol can impact it. Cholesterol is necessary for everybody to live. It's part of your cell membranes, but there's a balance of how much it should be in the meat. And when we start thinking about the future of the opportunity to make meat better, I think this is the only way to do it, because you can't engineer all of that into animals. It takes 7 years to inbreed and selectively get the right traits you want in an animal, but in our process, it's 3 to 4 weeks. And that offers the opportunity to really say, how can you make meat better? And that's one of the other motivating reasons for me to start this company.
Osnat, I'm pleased to see that our audience is a creative one and thinking several steps forward. They're wondering when we're going to see your sorts of modular sense of farming. Are you going to start selling it direct to the consumer? Are we going to be able to use your products at home? Are we going to be finding them in our fridge rather than at the supermarket?
I believe that each one of us will have its own dedicated farm. I'm not sure if it will be in our homes or maybe in central consumer places around the city. But the future as we see it is that our farms will be directly connected to each and every one of us health needs or diet preferences.
We've talked a lot about the scale you already have, 25 companies you're in. We've heard, of course, from you, Uma, on the fact that in a couple of years you want to be able to getting this to the consumer. Niklas, as the venture capital behind this, also working with other investors, how do you help these companies scale now? How do you help them bring them to our table here in the UK, in the US, in Asia?
So it's, first of all, it's always, the founders are building an amazing team who are scaling their businesses. What we can do is, of course, we provide capital, but we're also trying to encourage companies to think maybe bigger and further. One of the things we help, and we're helping with a few things. We're helping to how to scale the team, how to kind of build up your organizational structures, international expansion. But I think the reality is to kind of give support and encouragements to founders and say, you know what, that mission and that vision you have, go for it. And that's probably the most important advice we can do, and to be supportive and open a few doors here and there.
So we've got 30 seconds left. Osnat, sitting here in 10 years' time, what will be Infarm? Will you be in every supermarket? What's your thinking big vision?
I think we'll be all over the world and growing everything, having, providing you with a whole basket of your favorite food, and even those that you never knew existed.
Very nice. And Uma?
I'd say Memphis Meats is going to go for meat for everyone, everywhere, forever.
Just a small aim. Give it up to a wonderful panel. What a wonderful set of discourse. Fantastic questions. We want to thank you all in the audience as well. You really kept the ball rolling here. So please do thank Niklas Zennström, Osnat Michaeli, and Uma Valeti. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Caroline.